Half a millennium from now, humanity has forgotten how to think. The streets scream instead of speak. Ads shout louder than people. Logic is treated like a disease. And somewhere in that noise, a man named Joe Bowers, the most average man alive, wakes up to find that stupidity has won. When Idiocracy hit theaters in 2006, audiences laughed loudly. The world it showed was ridiculous people watering crops with sports drinks, a wrestling president firing guns into the air, and a society so brain-dead it made cavemen look like philosophers. It was meant to be absurd, but years later, no one's laughing anymore. What if Idiocracy wasn't a comedy at all? What if it was a warning? And what if that warning came true faster than anyone, even Mike Judge, ever imagined? Tonight, we're pulling back the curtain on the dark, fascinating truth behind one of the most prophetic films ever made. This is the untold story of Idiocracy, how it was conceived in the happiest place on earth, buried alive by its own studio, and accidentally predicted the future we're now living in. Act 1. The idea that wasn't supposed to exist. It started in Disneyland. Not in a studio, not in a boardroom, but in a line, surrounded by strollers and the sound of children screaming. Mike Judge, the man who gave us Beavis and Butthead and Office Space, was on a family trip when he witnessed something that shook him more than any dystopian movie could. Two mothers, both with kids in strollers, stood in the middle of the park. They weren't arguing. They were waging war, fists clenched, veins bulging, each sentence louder, uglier, meaner. And the most terrifying part? No one cared. Not the parents walking by, not the kids standing nearby, not even the park staff. It wasn't shocking anymore. It was normal. In that moment, Judge saw something terrifying. Not a future run by machines or dictators, but a future where basic decency had eroded completely. He would later describe that single moment as the spark that started Idiocracy. Not a science fiction dream, but a real, everyday nightmare. And the thought that haunted him afterward was chilling in its simplicity. What if this wasn't an isolated moment? What if this was evolution? From that seed grew a world where ignorance was no longer shameful, but celebrated, where consumerism replaced thought, and where the loudest voice always won. That's not science fiction. That's a mirror. Act 2. A world too dumb to laugh at. When Idiocracy was released, it was marketed barely as a comedy. The poster made it look like another stoner sci-fi. But the deeper you go, the clearer it becomes that Judge wasn't joking. Almost every absurdity in the film has since become reality. Let's start with the one everyone remembers. Brondo, the neon green energy drink that has electrolytes. In the movie, Brondo replaces water. It's what plants crave, what people drink, what society worships. It's both a parody and a prophecy. Because a few years later, energy drink marketing became indistinguishable from satire. Electrolytes, power, energy, performin', the same slogans, the same blind worship. Idiocracy didn't predict the rise of dumb advertising. It simply exaggerated what was already happening, and then reality caught up. Take Costco. In the film, Costco is no longer a store, it's a city. An absurd bureaucratic empire where everything from legal advice to higher education can be purchased like bulk toilet paper. Welcome to Costco. I love you. We laughed. Then came for-profit universities and online diploma mills. Pay money, get a degree, no learning required. Just like Idiocracy. And television? The movie's biggest joke was a show called Ow, My Balls. A man getting hit in the groin over and over while the entire population laughs hysterically. That was 2006. Fast forward, and the top clips online are fails, instant karma, people falling off skateboards. The joke became the algorithm. We laughed at Idiocracy. Now, we're living in Idiocracy. Act 3. The joke Hollywood couldn't handle. When Mike Judge finished the film, he thought the hard part was over. He was wrong. The studio executives who saw early screenings didn't just dislike Idiocracy, they were offended by it. Some called it anti-American. Others said it was too mean. One reportedly said, "You're insulting the audience." And that's exactly the problem. Idiocracy didn't pick sides. It didn't mock Democrats or Republicans, rich or poor. It mocked the entire system, from corporations and media to education and politics. The kind of mockery that makes everyone uncomfortable. Judge later admitted that executives started to realize something dangerous. The film wasn't making fun of some other group of people, it was making fun of them. Hollywood is built on giving people what they want. Idiocracy was built on asking, why do we want it? That's why Fox buried it. No trailers, no billboards, no red carpet. In some theaters, it was listed only as Untitled Mike Judge Project. Even the cast didn't know it had been released. The studio didn't just kill Idiocracy, it buried it alive. Because when a movie starts to look a little too much like the world outside the screen, it stops being funny and starts being dangerous. Act 4. The Croc's Prophecy. Here's one of the strangest twists in movie history. Remember those ridiculous plastic shoes everyone wears in the film? Those clunky, hole-filled, futuristic slippers that look too stupid to exist? They were real, and they were called Crocs. At the time, no one had ever heard of them. They were just cheap prototypes, ugly, but perfect for the movie's low-budget look. The costume designer found them, showed them to Judge, and he hesitated. What if these somehow become popular before the movie comes out? He asked. The crew laughed. No way, they said. No one would ever wear these things. You already know what happened next. A few years later, Crocs became a global sensation, worn by everyone from kids to celebrities. The very symbol of stupidity and idiocracy had crossed over into real life as a mainstream fashion statement. Mike Judge didn't predict the future. He accidentally helped design it. Act 5. Laughing in the Dark. Then there's Maya Rudolph. In Idiocracy, she plays Rita, a woman who time travels alongside Joe Bowers, pretending to be his girlfriend but standing out as one of the only sane, decent people left in the future. In a world screaming at itself, she's the last quiet voice, the calm in a hurricane of noise. While filming, Maya Rudolph was balancing real life and fiction in a haunting way. She became a mother just before the movie's release, at the same time the studio was quietly burying the film. On screen, she played the last intelligent person in a world gone mad. Off screen, she was entering motherhood, nurturing life in a world that seemed to be getting stranger by the day. That contrast makes her role hit differently now. Because Idiocracy isn't really about dumb people, it's about what happens when intelligence becomes irrelevant, when compassion and reason aren't just rare, but unfashionable. Rita wasn't just the film's moral anchor, she was its last flicker of hope. Act 6. When Laughter Turns to Fear. If there's one actor who embodies Idiocracy's transformation from comedy to prophecy, it's Terry Crews. As President Dwayne Elizondo Mountain Dew Herbert Camacho, yes, that's his full name, Crews delivered one of the most ridiculous, unforgettable performances in modern comedy. A muscle-bound ex-wrestler, firing guns, roaring at crowds, and ruling America with pure adrenaline. He was supposed to be absurd, a cartoon come to life. But years later, Terry Crews admitted something chilling. The more he watched the world change, the more the joke scared him. He said, "When I look back now, I'm not sure if it's comedy anymore." Camacho wasn't evil. He was elected because he was entertaining. Because he made people feel something, even if that something was rage or excitement. Sound familiar? That's what frightened Crews. Because once emotion replaces reason, once performance becomes politics, there's no line between reality TV and reality itself. Camacho stopped being a parody. He became a prophecy. Act 7. Arrested for being an asshole. There's a tiny detail in Idiocracy that most people miss, but once you notice it, it's impossible to forget. When Joe Bowers is arrested, the computer processing his paperwork lists his crimes in plain text. Because he's an asshole, for escaping from prison, for causing lots of bad stuff. No legal codes, no explanations, just emotional labels. It's funny for a split second, until you realize what it's really saying. In Idiocracy, the law hasn't disappeared, it's just been dumbed down. Precision has been replaced by feelings. Justice has been replaced by popularity. You're not arrested for breaking the law. You're arrested because people don't like you. It's one of the film's quietest, most terrifying ideas. When language dies, freedom follows. Act 8. The Buried Movie. You probably don't remember Idiocracy hitting theaters in 2006. That's because it barely did. No trailers, no billboards, no press junkets, no talk show appearances, no red carpet premieres. When opening weekend arrived, it was as if the film didn't exist. In several theaters, it appeared under the title Untitled Mike Judge Project. Some cinemas didn't even bother to print posters. The film ran for a week in select cities and quietly vanished. Even the actors were stunned. Some only found out it had been released after it was already gone. Hollywood insiders whispered that Idiocracy had been buried alive. A film too uncomfortable to market, too honest to promote, too reflective of the very system that was selling it. Because if the movie forced audiences to see how entertainment dumbs down society, then how do you sell that through entertainment? The irony was perfect and brutal. The movie about a society that no longer cared to think was itself destroyed by a system that didn't want people to think. Act 9. Brando. From satire to store shelf. Inside the movie, Brando is a symbol of everything wrong with consumer culture. A garish, corporate, brain-melting drink advertised with the slogan, "It's got electrolytes." It replaces water. It ruins crops. It feeds stupidity. A perfect joke, until the punchline became real. Because while Fox refused to market the movie, they quietly bought the rights to the Brando brand. Let that sink in. The same studio that hid Idiocracy from the public wanted to sell its fake product in real life, and they did. Brando hit the shelves as a novelty energy drink. Loud design, fake science, real caffeine. People loved it. Some fans drank it unironically, never realizing it was born as a warning. It was the movie's entire message reduced to merchandise. The satire of blind consumerism became an actual product of blind consumerism. Reality had swallowed the joke whole. Act 10. The Surgeon General's Warning. If you blink, you'll miss it. A billboard for Tarleton cigarettes flashes across the screen, and in tiny print at the bottom, there's a Surgeon General's warning. But instead of a health message, it reads, "The Surgeon General has one lung and one vocal cord, but he can still kick your sorry ass." It's absurd, funny, throwaway, until you stop to think. That one joke sums up the entire philosophy of Idiocracy. Health warnings still exist, but they've been twisted into macho slogans. Information hasn't disappeared, it's just drowned in noise. It's a world where truth is reduced to decoration. Where warnings don't protect people, they entertain them. And if that feels familiar, it's because we've already arrived there. Scrolling headlines, competing for attention. Danger framed as spectacle. A culture where the louder the message, the less it says. Mike Judge wasn't mocking the future. He was whispering to the present. This is where we're heading. If you stop listening. Act 11. Brand overload. Another strange detail. Idiocracy uses dozens of real brands. Starbucks, Carl's Jr. Costco, Fuddruckers. They're everywhere. No censor blur, no parody names. Most filmmakers would hide those trademarks to avoid lawsuits. Mike Judge did the opposite. He used so many that no single brand could claim to be targeted. It was legal camouflage through saturation, and yet, it became part of the joke. In the future of Idiocracy, branding is language. Every sentence, every sign, every government service has a sponsor. Even the hospitals are named after fast food chains. The world isn't run by politicians, it's run by marketing departments. The citizens of the future don't pledge allegiance to a flag. They pledge it to a logo. It's exaggerated, yes, but then again, so was, "Ow, my balls." And we all know how that turned out. Act 12. Ow, my balls. And the death of thinking. At first glance, ow, my balls is the dumbest joke in the movie. A man gets repeatedly kicked in the groin, and the audience roars with laughter. That's the entire show, but that's the point. Mike Judge saw reality TV rising in the early 2000s, programs built on humiliation, pain, and instant gratification. He didn't invent, "Ow, my balls." He just saw where entertainment was heading. When he said, "act like a cartoon," he meant it literally. The characters in Idiocracy aren't evil. They're exaggerated versions of what happens when everything, news, comedy, even politics, gets simplified into emotion. Shock becomes currency, pain becomes punchline, and thinking becomes a luxury few can afford. By the time YouTube and TikTok arrived, "Ow, my balls," had already come true. Millions of short clips where people fall, crash, fail, and the world laughs. No context, no story, just impact. Idiocracy's dumbest joke turned out to be its smartest prophecy. Act 13. A movie too smart to sell. Idiocracy didn't bomb because it was bad. It bombed because no one knew it existed. Its box office total, around $400,000. That's less than what some blockbusters spend on catering, but hidden beneath that failure was the cruelest irony imaginable. The movie that warned about a world too stupid to understand complex ideas was ignored because people thought it was too complicated to sell. Executives labeled it too niche, too harsh, not market-friendly. In short, it forced audiences to think. So the studio treated it exactly like the world in the film would have. They ignored it. A movie that mocked apathy was destroyed by apathy. A movie that warned about anti-intellectualism was silenced by anti-intellectualism. It wasn't a failure of filmmaking. It was a failure of courage. Act 14. The dangerous line of satire. During production, Mike Judge gave his actors a simple instruction: act like cartoons. He didn't want realism. He wanted exaggeration. No subtle emotions, no nuance, just absurd behavior. But something unsettling started to happen on set. Some extras, thinking the movie encouraged stupidity, began acting offensively. They crossed lines that weren't in the script. Crude jokes, racist slurs, behavior that wasn't funny at all. Judge had to step in, cut scenes, and remind everyone, we're mocking stupidity, not celebrating it. That's the razor edge of satire, the constant risk of being misunderstood. Because when you show people a reflection of idiocy, some of them don't see the reflection. They see permission. Judge wasn't filming a world of villains. He was filming a world of people who had simply stopped thinking. And that's scarier than any evil empire. Act 15. Camacho's lost comeback. Years later, as Idiocracy quietly evolved from forgotten flop to cult classic, someone floated an idea. Bring back President Camacho. Maybe a short film, maybe an ad campaign, maybe even a cameo. The studio was interested for a moment, but then, silence. The reason was never announced publicly. Inside Hollywood, though, whispers spread. Camacho was no longer a harmless parody. He was too real. The exaggerated president from a comedy now looked too much like real political figures. Suddenly, laughing at him didn't feel safe anymore. Fox backed out. The project vanished. And President Camacho stayed frozen on screen, a character trapped between fiction and prophecy, too true to resurrect. Act 16. From comedy to documentary. A decade after Idiocracy, something strange happened. The laughter stopped. Audiences who once howled in theaters began rewatching it in silence. Lines that were once punchlines now felt like news headlines. Moments that once seemed impossible suddenly looked familiar. Mike Judge noticed it too. In later interviews, he stopped calling Idiocracy a comedy. He half-jokingly called it a documentary. The transformation was complete. A film once buried became resurrected by reality itself. And it wasn't streaming platforms or marketing campaigns that saved it, it was people. College students sharing DVDs. Reddit threads dissecting every scene. YouTube essays turning its jokes into warnings. Idiocracy didn't just survive, it evolved. It became a cultural reference point, a modern myth, a mirror people couldn't stop looking into even if they hated what they saw. Act 17. the original warning. Long before Idiocracy, there was another story written in 1951 by C.M. Kornbluth. It was called The Marching Morons. Its premise was simple, terrifying, and decades ahead of its time. Smart people stop having children. Ignorant people reproduce without restraint. Over generations, the average intelligence plummets and civilization collapses under its own stupidity. Mike Judge read that story as a young man and never forgot it. He didn't see it as fiction. He saw it as a prediction. So when he wrote Idiocracy, he wasn't inventing a new idea. He was updating an old warning. Only this time, the decline wasn't biological. It was cultural. Not genes, attention spans. Not evolution algorithms. Where the marching morons imagined intelligence disappearing naturally, Idiocracy showed it being marketed out of existence. Act 18, the title that scared Fox. Before Idiocracy had its name, Mike Judge pitched a different title, The United States of America, spelled phonetically wrong. It was bold. It was satirical. It was everything the movie was about, and Fox hated it. Executives said it was offensive, unmarketable, un-American. Judge refused to back down. At first, he believed the title was essential, but after weeks of meetings, he realized the studio would rather kill the movie than release it under that name. So he compromised. He chose something safer, something less direct. A single word that sounded funny until you realized how accurate it was. Idiocracy, Act 19. The Office Space Connection. Watch Office Space and Idiocracy back to back, and you'll notice something strange. They feel like two chapters of the same story. In Office Space, people are crushed by bureaucracy, drained by meaningless work, suffocating in fluorescent cubicles. They're not stupid, they're exhausted. In Idiocracy, those same souls have evolved or devolved into a world that no longer even remembers what exhaustion feels like because thinking itself is extinct. Judge reused many of the same actors deliberately. He wanted continuity, the sense that Idiocracy is what happens when the world of Office Space finally stops caring altogether. First comes resignation, then comes noise, then comes silence. The silence of reason disappearing from human culture. Act 20, the family tree. Right at the beginning of Idiocracy, before the jokes and chaos, there's a sequence almost everyone forgets. A family tree. It shows how the future went wrong. Intelligent families having fewer children, impulsive ones having more. But if you pause, you'll see something strange. Some of the names in that family tree come straight from King of the Hill. Hank Hill, the everyman hero of reason and decency, exists somewhere in that timeline. His descendants fade into the future. Generation by generation, his values thin out, diluted until they disappear. It's Mike Judge's quiet signature and his final warning. Because Idiocracy doesn't say intelligence is destroyed overnight. It says it's diluted, one careless generation at a time, until there's not enough left to notice what's been lost. Closing monologue, the mirror we can't look away from. When Idiocracy first arrived, people laughed because they believed it could never happen. It was too exaggerated, too stupid, too far-fetched. But that laughter carried a dangerous comfort, the comfort of thinking we were smarter than the people on screen. And maybe that's the real warning Mike Judge left behind. Society doesn't collapse because of malice. It collapses because people stop caring, because thinking becomes tiring, because outrage becomes easier than understanding. When intelligence fades, it doesn't vanish with an explosion. It dissolves quietly, one meme, one headline, one like at a time. And so, Idiocracy endures not as a film, but as a mirror. A reflection that grows sharper the longer we stare. Because maybe the scariest thing about Mike Judge's dystopia isn't how ridiculous it was. It's how familiar it's become. Act 21. The Rebirth. For almost a decade, Idiocracy existed like a ghost, buried by its studio, ignored by theaters, forgotten by the public. But ghosts have a way of returning, especially when the world begins to look like the one they warned about. Then came the DVDs. College students began passing them around like secret artifacts. Film professors added it quietly to their syllabi. Internet forums started trading quotes like scripture. "Welcome to Costco. I love you." Water? Like from the toilet? And of course, it's got electrolytes. It started as irony, but slowly, the laughter turned to recognition. The more absurd the world became, the more Idiocracy looked less like fiction and more like a time capsule from the future. Soon, YouTube channels were analyzing it. Reddit threads were dissecting its meaning. Memes turned it into modern prophecy. By 2016, the movie's name had become a cultural shorthand, one word that could summarize an entire decade of decline. People didn't ask, "Have you seen Idiocracy?" They asked, "Are we living in Idiocracy?" A forgotten $400,000 flop had become the Rosetta Stone of modern absurdity. Act 22. When the world caught up. Something happens when satire becomes real, it stops being funny. Mike Judge, usually a man of quiet humor, began to look uncomfortable when journalists brought up Idiocracy. He'd chuckle politely, shake his head, and say, "Yeah, I didn't mean for it to happen this fast." Because suddenly, every exaggerated idea in his movie had a real-world twin. The loudest people got the most attention. Complex issues were simplified into slogans. Corporations talked like friends. And entertainment became indistinguishable from politics. The future Judge imagined 500 years away had somehow arrived in less than 20. The laughter faded, the mirror cleared, and everyone saw themselves staring back. Act 23. Why we didn't see it coming. There's something deeply human about how we react to warnings. We hear them, nod, agree, and then keep walking. We're drawn to satire because it lets us laugh at what scares us. But when that satire turns into reality, we look away. Maybe that's why Idiocracy was buried. Not because it insulted anyone, but because it told a truth too early, too clearly, and too loudly for people who weren't ready to hear it. It's easy to laugh at a world drowning in stupidity. It's harder to admit that the tide's already at your knees. When Idiocracy jokes about watering crops with energy drinks, it's not just a gag, it's a metaphor for how convenience replaces wisdom. When people cheer for President Camacho, it's not random absurdity, it's a warning about charisma replacing competence. And when the movie's laws stop making sense, it's a message about what happens when words lose their meaning. The future Judge described wasn't a fantasy. It was a slow erosion, one that starts with comfort and ends in chaos. Act 24. The Judge's Curse. For Mike Judge, Idiocracy became both a blessing and a curse. Fans praised him as a prophet. Critics who once ignored the film came crawling back, calling it visionary, genius, ahead of its time. In the stock septend. But for Judge, that was the worst compliment imaginable. Because he never wanted to be right. He once said in an interview, "I wish it wasn't so accurate. I wish it was just a dumb movie." He had written satire, not scripture. But time, it seems, had decided otherwise. And as the world kept moving toward the absurdity he once joked about, the laughter he'd invited began to feel hollow. Act 25. The fan base that saved it. When something is too raw for corporations to handle, people take it back. That's exactly what happened with Idiocracy. By the 2010 seconds, its fan base had transformed into an underground movement. Film lovers, thinkers, meme makers, cultural critics, all using the film as a touchstone for modern life. Clips spread like wildfire. Quotes became inside jokes. Entire essays and podcasts dissected every scene. It had been buried by its studio, but resurrected by its audience, a poetic reversal that would have made Judge smile if it weren't so bittersweet. The same generation that was supposed to be too distracted to think deeply had rediscovered the very film that told them what would happen if they stopped thinking. Idiocracy was no longer entertainment. It was education through irony. Act 26. From satire to language. By the time the 2020 seconds arrived, Idiocracy had evolved into something new. It wasn't just a movie anymore. It was a word, a diagnosis. Journalists used it to describe elections, viral trends, and corporate scandals. An idiocracy moment, they'd say. Peak idiocracy. The film's title became a shorthand for a cultural condition, the exact one it had been warning about. Think about that. A satire becomes language, a joke becomes truth, and a comedy becomes a mirror no one can laugh at. That's not just influence. That's evolution. Act 27. The Mirror Test. There's a moment near the end of Idiocracy when Joe Bowers, the world's dumbest smart man, stands before a crowd begging for reason. He tries to explain that water, not Brondo, makes plants grow. They laugh in his face. He pleads, reasons, and argues, but logic means nothing in a world where belief has replaced knowledge. Eventually, they listen, not because he's right, but because they're desperate. And for a moment, the world begins to heal. It's a small victory, but it's everything. Because Idiocracy isn't saying that stupidity wins forever. It's saying that intelligence only survives if someone, anyone, decides to care again. That's the mirror test of Idiocracy. It's not asking, are we there yet? It's asking, have we already given up trying not to be? Act 28. The Paradox of Prophecy. Every great satire faces the same fate. When it's released, people laugh. When it's fulfilled, people quote it. And when it's too accurate, people pretend it was never meant to be funny. That's the paradox Idiocracy lives inside. The more correct it becomes, the less people want to talk about it. Because prophecy isn't entertainment, it's accountability. Mike Judge didn't predict the future. He just watched the present carefully enough to know where it was heading. He didn't exaggerate reality. He removed the parts we like to pretend aren't real. And that's why Idiocracy endures. Because the future it describes isn't 500 years away. It's now. Act 29. The Last Laugh. The great irony is that Idiocracy, a movie about stupidity, is one of the smartest films Hollywood ever made. It was written off as lowbrow humor, made on a shoestring budget, and quietly abandoned by its creators. And yet, it survived every marketing failure, every box office flop, every corporate silence. It survived because truth always finds an audience. And that's what Hollywood never understood. The same executives who buried it thought they were protecting the system. In reality, they were proving the film right. They treated the public like it wouldn't understand something too smart, too honest, too uncomfortable. They thought audiences didn't want to think. And that's the heart of Idiocracy's message, that the moment we assume people are too dumb to care, we create the very world we fear. Act 30. The Final Warning. Let's return for a moment to where it all began. Disneyland. Two mothers screaming at each other, surrounded by children. A moment of chaos that felt so ordinary. No one cared except one man. From that moment came a movie. From that movie came a warning. And from that warning came a reflection we still haven't escaped. Mike Judge didn't invent Idiocracy out of cynicism. He wrote it out of fear. Fear that someday we'd laugh at stupidity instead of resisting it. But maybe, just maybe, that's where hope still lives. Because Idiocracy hasn't just survived because of its jokes. It survived because people still recognize the difference between the world on screen and the world outside. As long as that difference exists, as long as people are still watching, analyzing, and questioning, the movie's prophecy isn't complete. It's a warning, not a destination. And warnings only matter if someone listens. Epilogue. A society that still thinks. Maybe Idiocracy didn't predict the end of intelligence. Maybe it predicted the moment before, the moment when society teeters between laughter and awareness. That's where we are now. Every time someone rewatches the film, every time someone recognizes a line or a headline and says, "That feels too real," they're proving Mike Judge wrong in the best possible way. Because that recognition, that discomfort, means we're still thinking, still aware, still capable of being shocked. The day Idiocracy stops feeling scary is the day it finally wins. But as long as people keep questioning, analyzing, and refusing to accept stupidity as normal, as long as we still care enough to look in the mirror, there's hope. Not the kind that comes from speeches or slogans, But the quiet kind, the kind that comes from a whisper, from a filmmaker who once looked around and said, "If this keeps up, this is where we're heading," and then showed us before it was too late to laugh. Hollywood View. Because sometimes, the movies that make us laugh the hardest are the ones that know us best.